setting up a spending plan for retirement. Let's talk about it. Hello, I am William Doty, certified financial planner here with Modern Wealth Management, as well as the head planner here in the Lenexa office. And today I'm here to talk about setting up a spending plan in retirement. So let's talk about how do you set up a spending plan in retirement. And with much of the videos that you've watched in the past, it's going to sound like a broken record. You have to start with a plan. The plan gives us everything on how do we actually establish when are you going to spend down certain assets over what period of time throughout the retirement phase in life. So let's talk about a plan, starting off and building one. So the plan needs to take into account everything, right? So we need to understand your assets, your liabilities, the different types of fixed income sources that you may have through retirement, things like health expenses that a lot of people kind of forget about, especially, when we're working, the premiums deducted from the paycheck, we don't really think about that when we trip over into retirement. Well, now we have to pay for that stuff out of pocket. So again, this all goes in to that spending plan and when these things are going to be happening. We also want to look at different things throughout the year to understand not only, what does Mr. and Mrs. Client need to land in their checking account each month so they can, pay the bills, that sort of thing. But we also want to understand all the big ticket items, right? So we want to understand when do you want to spend money on, say travel. Obviously that's a budgetary item that a lot of people do kind of early on in retirement and enjoy it. And there could be things like home improvements that need to be done that you've always had on the bucket list that you'd really like to have done for retirement. Giving to charity or even down to your kids or grandkids could be a part of your plan. Again, everything's different for everybody. So we have to start off there, understanding what your budgetary items are, what assets do we have to fund those goals, and then really what is important to you long term. So now once we've established your plan, we then run this through sophisticated planning software that is doing what is referred to as Monte Carlo simulation. If you're not familiar with that, it's just a fancy term for mixing and matching different sequences of rate of return on the portfolio or loss to understand how many trials do we wind up successful. And by success, we mean you die before you go broke is how we deem it. And we want to have that at a fairly high level of percent. And we are ranking from 0 up to 99%. So obviously the higher the number, the better off we are. And depending upon where you're at in life as well, we definitely want to be hitting at least minimal levels on that probability to make sure that we're not putting too much at risk in your retirement. Now, once the plan is built, if it's deemed successful, this is when we can move into the actual building of that spending plan in retirement. If your plan comes back, unfortunately, not successful, now we have to go back to the drawing board on how do we create a plan that is successful. So this, again, could be tied into your current budget and how you're spending money. Maybe you need to save more, work longer. We have to, unfortunately, talk about spending less in retirement in order to gain success. So now we're at a point, we have a successful plan. And again, this is helping guide us on all of our decisions in how we're putting the spending plan into place. So again, the basis for the spending plan is we need to take into account all of the financial pieces, right? So you have things like Social Security. Some of you that may be fortunate may actually still have access to pensions. Others may have things like deferred comp plans. So the first step in understanding your spending plan are what types of fixed income sources that you have for your retirement. And then we want to start to analyze and understand what are the timing of these fixed income sources. With Social Security, we can start early at 62, we can wait till full retirement age, wait till 70, any other month in between. And then there's other areas that we want to understand with that budgetary item and how does it flow in for that spending plan. But we also want to make sure that we're not taking advantage of it and making sure that we are maximizing the Social Security decision, not only for you, also potentially for a surviving spouse. And we also have to take into account taxation because Social Security is taxed in a completely different manner. There are things such as the provisional income test, which will play a part. If you don't know what that is, feel free, reach out. Ask questions, be more than happy to talk about what is the provisional income test and how does that relate to the taxability of Social Security and how that then falls into that spending plan decision. Same thing with pensions. Again, pensions, deferred comps, those might be a little bit more rigid as far as when can you start them? Do they have an ending date? What options do you have? But again, we want to look at all of those as well. So now that we've established when and how we're going to deliver your fixed income assets, this is now when we take a look at all of your liquid assets. And what is really important here is understanding the different time periods of your life and when these different spending plans are coming into play. Again, going back to, is there a budget for charity that we need to be looking at different tactics for? Or are we wanting to spend an extra $15,000 a year on travel for the first decade of retirement? And this is, again, going back to that plan, understanding what all these moving pieces are and when we need things funded. From there, we want to look out at not just year number one, in which we need this spending plan to start, but we really want to be looking at typically that first 1, 3, 5, 10 years of retirement, depending upon when we retired at what age, could be very vital on how we are actually spending down those saved assets. And again, these saved assets, these can be saved into what we call 3 different tax buckets. You have bucket number 1, which is called taxable. I know it's kind of a confusing term. It's actually after-tax money. So think of money that maybe you have at the bank in a savings account. This money can also be invested in a brokerage account, stocks, bonds, or whatever the case may be. The reason the term is taxable is because going forward, you are going to owe money on dividends, interest, and potentially capital gains that bucket of money is generating. Now, again, we get a lot of control in that space. Also, we can use that bucket to spend down early on in retirement to make it look like maybe you're not generating a lot of money. We have the next bucket over, which is going to be the most popular bucket, or I don't want to say popular, but the one that most people have because we've all been told to save there for many, many years. And that would be the bucket that is tax deferred. Now, this comes in a whole variety of different registrations, things like IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, inherited IRAs, all of these things. And there's some little bit different rules to each, but the main thing to understand with those buckets, you have not spent a nickel of tax. So you have a partner in that bucket that you may or may not be aware of, and his name's Uncle Sam. So really understanding, what are the rules long-term for those buckets? When do we have to take things like required minimum distributions? We want to understand that. What that dynamic is later on in life as well, because again, if we don't plan for it with an appropriate spending plan, we may balloon that bucket to where our distributions are getting so large, now we're incurring more taxes and potentially even affecting what is referred to as IRMA for Medicare. And again, just like the provisional income test, is that if that's something you've not heard of, definitely reach out and talk to a planner and how that may actually be working inside of your plan. Then we have the last bucket, which is potentially tax-free, aka the Roth. Some of you may have this, some of you may not. Part of the spending plan, though, may be longer-term tax plays on how do we spend from each one of those 3 buckets during certain periods of time in life in order to minimize taxes for the entirety of the plan. So really, the spending plan is going to be a little bit different for everybody. It's going to be different because you all have different levels of assets. You've saved into different buckets. You have different fixed income sources that come into play. But a really good spending plan, again, is going to be looking at how do we optimize when and how we spend down each asset coupled with our fixed income sources. All right, now take a look at this image. This is looking at potentially the 3 different buckets that you may or may not have. And again, we need to understand this, and this is very easy to understand. Okay, well, we have this certain point in time in the future when you're going to retire, and this spending plan is going to need to be put in place. And again, we can look at, do we take Social Security early? Do we take it later? That then helps us have an idea, if that's our only fixed income source, of what gap, what shortfall do we have? And you can see here by this line, that's the spending need, in the difference of what the Social Security bucket for this hypothetical client is filling up and what our shortfalls in those different periods of life. Now that we have that part of the budget established, now again, it's going back to these 3 buckets. Where do we have money, and when do we send money down from each one of those 3 in order to fill up those gaps? Or are we able to take advantage of maybe spending down principal in that after-tax bucket money, making Uncle Sam think that we're in a very low tax rate early on in retirement, and then start to take advantage of different tactics like Roth conversions and moving money from that tax deferred bucket over to Roth for, again, a longer term spending plan. I hope you can see that this is where having a plan is very vital. And honestly, it really helps to have somebody like a certified financial planner or a CPA, a trusted advisor that can sit down and help you actually look through all these moving pieces, because there's a lot to understand in how each one of your financial assets and income sources are going to play in this spending plan. I'd like to thank you for your time today. Again, my name is William Doty, certified financial planner, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of how to create a retirement spending plan. If you need help in setting up a spending plan for your retirement, please feel free, reach out. We'd be more than happy to help you understand your plan and your dynamics in setting up that spending plan. Thank you for watching today's video. And if you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends.